Why don't let me sort of offer a few preliminaries, Jonathan. I think many of the people on this call have been on previous Sapir calls, but for those who haven't, I just want to introduce this still relatively new Journal of Jewish Conversations, as we subtitle it. It's a quarterly. Your piece appeared in our third issue. This was our first on social justice. This is really a technological feat here. Our second on the subject of power, and our third on the subject of continuity, which is where your piece appears. Sapir was conceived as an effort from the Maimonides Fund, which publishes it, to enlarge and enrich Jewish conversations across lines of ideology and lines of observance, to be as prescriptive as we are hopefully diagnostic in our talk, to include voices that often don't find themselves in the same pages together, secular, religious, left and right, and really to, the theme of conversation is just central to everything we're doing. So having the opportunity to host these Zoom calls is central to our task. When we started, I should add, when we began this project, the idea was to do 4 issues. I'm pleased to say that we are now making Sapir a going concern that will go well beyond its initial remit, and we aim to keep doing what we're doing, experimenting a little bit with the form to see what works, but hopefully with each issue, just really focusing on one theme in particular. And in the case of the issue in which you appear, that issue was continuity. You wrote an essay, really, and I just reread it for probably the 4th time just this morning, the 4th or 5th time. More unites us than divides us, a Haredi perspective. And I just want to begin, Jonathan, by asking you, for those who haven't read the piece, I know for those who have, it may seem a bit repetitive, but for those who haven't read the piece, to tell us a little bit about your personal story, because like me, you were afflicted with a University of Chicago education and then Yale Law School. But life took you in, I think, a not usual direction. So maybe you want to just tell us about that story and how you ended up being a leading light in your community.
Well, there are no highlights except for being born Jewish after a University of Chicago education. You know that, right? But I don't think anyone would have predicted in my youth that I would end up spending so far 42 years in this community, least of all myself. But I think I finally feel at home. The story that I mentioned in the piece, of course, is one that sort of never leaves me. I was in Israel with 2 of my brothers. We're here the summer of 1976. We were supposed to get together at Bloomfield Stadium for a United States bicentennial celebration. And I got on a bus that morning on my way to Ulpan class to improve my Hebrew. And there was pandemonium. I had seen scenes like that before in Hebrew school, where we watched the dancing upon Ben Gurion's announcement of the Declaration of Independence. But to see it in person and experience it, and I had no idea what was going on. My Hebrew was not yet very good. My kids will tell you it's still not very good. But in any event, it took me a while to grasp what was going on, but I had never seen such excitement, people hugging and kissing each other. And so I realized that there had been a rescue at Entebbe, something that was thought impossible. And then I started looking around the bus. I remember that when I'm on a subway in New York, it never occurs to me to get on the subway and put up my hands and say, we're all Americans. You know, you get taken to Bellevue if you do something like that. Whereas on this bus, I had one overwhelming thought: we're all Jews. And I started, well, what's the connection between us? How does that connect us? Why is this Yemenite Jew whose ancestors were gone from this place 2,500 years ago, before the destruction of the Second Temple? What do we have? What do we have in common? And I decided that, you know, I'd been that summer to the Diaspora Museum. I had read the Book of Fire of all the destructions of Jewish communities, beginning with the York Massacre in 1296. I'm not exactly sure. And I realized that we were all the product, whether we were products of great scholars or peasants, and across the globe and longitudinally through time, we were all the products of an unbroken chain of ancestors for whom they had gained something out of their connection to being Jewish that was so powerful that they bore the stick of pogroms, of murder. You know, you could be the leader of the most powerful man on the Iberian Peninsula, Shmuel Nagid, and your son would be torn to death in the marketplace. You had no security that you would live in a place for 3 generations. And yet, and plus everything was offered to you. You went over to the other side, you were the most literate people in that society, and you had international connections. You were a big bonus, the biggest bonus to Christian or Islamic society, whichever one you happen to find yourself. So how do they resist those blandishments, and how do they deal with that degree of brutal oppression? I said, there must be something so powerful about their connection to God that it made it worthwhile. But here I am. Can you still tap into that? That was my question. Could that still be tapped into?
But let me ask you, so because this is obviously a subject of not just academic interest to me, but of personal interest, that realization, which I think many of us have had at some point in our lives. I had it in a very different way, discovering how much anti-Semitism there was in Europe when a guy named Stephens is in a room with people who don't think of Stephens as a Jewish name.
And he used to be a blonde, though.
But that powerful realization of this connection to one's Judaism could lead in a variety of directions. One, the most obvious one perhaps, is simply to Zionism. I mean, there are millions of Israelis today who had that realization and are living fairly secular lives in Tel Aviv, or even in just different neighborhoods of Jerusalem throughout Israel. So what was the pull of Torah and of religious scholarship, and why was that so essential in your case?
Well, because I had identified that unifying element of us, at least in the past. I don't think you can become religious because of anything that happened to your ancestors or choices that your ancestors have made. You're going to eventually have to make the choice for yourself. But that led me in a certain direction. Now, I was returning to America in a month or two to start my practice of law in Chicago. And
now, just to be clear for those who haven't read the essay, you were raised in a somewhat observant conservative household, correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Highly identified. To me, the central event of my childhood is my mother coming into my room. I'm 16 years old, and she's in tears to wake us up in the morning. She's in tears, and she's heard that Israel's at war. It's the 1967 war, and we never let a TV anywhere near our family dining table. But during the weeks leading up to that, we never talked at the table. We just listened to Abba Eban and the debates at the UN. We were a highly identified family. My grandfather had been the lay leader of the conservative movement in America. The second plaque when you come into the Jewish Theological Seminary is his. So we were raised with a strong Jewish identity. I came to Israel first at the age of 11 with my mother and my next brother. We had, it's sort of like Ruth Weiss says, we weren't particularly observant in her book, but she says, but a word was never heard spoken against God. That didn't happen in our house. There was no disrespect for religion. We simply didn't know very much about it, but because I had identified that as the unifying fact, I looked there. It took me 2 years. I just happened to stumble into a shul in Chicago while living in a predominantly gay neighborhood of Chicago, but there was an old Orthodox shul there, which I stumbled into. The rabbi invited me every week for 2 years. When I first met my wife and she told me on our first date that she had spent a year on a kibbutz, I knew that this was the woman I was going to marry, because I said, who's going to share my interest in Israel? I mean, we were a Zionist home, and I think that that had a big impact on me. There's no question that that did have an impact on me. But in our family, 4 out of 5 brothers joined the Haredi community. My mother is 91 years old now, has over 115 living descendants. So she reaped the benefits, if they are benefits, and I have no question that they are in her mind, of her children's decisions. But we always felt we were following our parents. You told us the most important thing about us was being Jewish. Now, you cannot separate being Jewish from the Torah. I mean, that is the common thread that runs throughout our history. So I looked there, and I was lucky to find this rabbi. I was lucky to find my wife. I was lucky to come to Israel. I was intending to go to JTS rabbinical school when we came to Israel. My wife said to me, maybe we should spend another year around people for whom Torah is the center of their lives. And that year is now extended into 42 and a half years. So I guess we're still on our honeymoon. But,
so, Jonathan, the theme of the issue is continuity. And I want to talk a little bit about your views on the state of American Jewry. You cite pieces from Jack Wertheimer and others that paint a fairly grim picture of the long-term future of the American Jewish community. Are you? I mean, you've decided to make your life in Israel. What do you forecast for this side of the Jewish community?
Well, you know, they say doctors go to Gehenna because they are prone to make predictions. I don't think it's my job to predict the future of the American Jewish community, though I am on record of writing in commentary a couple years back that it's entered a demographic death cycle, which is low fertility rates, low rates of marriage, late marriage, extraordinary rates of intermarriage. But this is not, you know, I quote all the statistics there. Al pi derech hateva, through the natural course of events, the non-Orthodox community in America has a limited future. But that's not my business. That's not my business. My business is to talk about what could be done about it. I mean, the statistics are all there. Wertheimer was the provost of JTS. He's not writing with any satisfaction or happiness about that, nor am I bringing those statistics with any degree of happiness. But I think as important as the demographic factors that he points to are, is the lack of interest in, as a Rabbi John Moskowitz from the Holy Blossom Synagogue in Temple in Toronto, one of the premier Reformed temples in North America, has said, there's nobody in the shul, there's nobody here interested in Jewish texts. You don't have enough basis of people who are interested in classical Jewish texts. So I'm a social director. I'm not a teacher of Torah in any real sense. That's the fundamental problem. How does being Jewish become, how do you go about life with a sense of privilege to have been born Jewish? Where does it come from? I mean, I just did an interview. I just interviewed Ruth Weiss, and I pushed her hard on this. What are you gonna? How do you define something that is unique apart from what makes it such a special privilege? What is it about this people that is unique? And I do think attaching young Jews to the Jewish story is essential to the story, because it's, as Pascal said, it's the greatest miracle in history. It is.
And is it your view, Jonathan, that in effect what's happening to the Jewish community, at least in the United States, by that I mean the non-Orthodox Jewish community, Reform or conservative or otherwise, but non-Orthodox, that in effect what is the demographic trends, the diminution in sort of a Jewish sensibility, affiliation, observance, practice, self-identification, that is inevitable, that nothing other than a turn towards greater Torah observance could alter those trends?
I don't want to go that far. I don't want to. I really don't want to engage in polemics. That's, you know. It's,
no, I'm not. I'm not. I mean, look, this is a conversation.
I don't want to be. I don't want to be the voice of doom. What I do think is, if we cannot restore, first of all, restore the idea, the sense that this is a primary identity. As if it's a tertiary identity, then it makes more sense to, marry somebody who shares your taste in Truffaut films than it does to marry a fellow Jew, unless you can identify some core of your existence which is connected to something Jewish. And how to identify something Jewish? All the things in the Pew survey that American Jews identify as, these are Jewish: a sense of social justice, a certain sense of humor, particular foods. These are all things that can be shared by anybody, and they're not uniquely Jewish, exclusively Jewish. They don't really provide a reason to marry another Jew. They don't give you a sense of what it is that you want to preserve. What are you passing on? I mean, in that, one of my University of Chicago classes, I remember reading the epigram in Paul Goodman's Growing Up Absurd, which is taken from Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers. The task is not yours to complete, neither are you free to leave it off. And I understood myself then, oh, there's a chain here. There's a chain. It either ends with me or I have something to pass on. But what do I have to pass on? What's the content of what I have to pass on? We always told my parents, you have nobody to blame because you told us the most important thing was being Jewish, and we came to find out what that was. Will I be the end of the chain, or will I be a part of the chain going forward? Without attaching to the Jewish story, without attaching to Jewish history, how does one do it? And I think that really does require at least some interest in Jewish text. I remember you once told me that you were being hassled by a local Aish Torah rabbi who wanted you to come in and learn with him. And you were resisting. I bet you're
I'm still being hassled by that very, very same rabbi.
Okay, good for him. Good for him.
I'll succumb eventually.
Yeah, but I can't come to America. I haven't been out of this country, and I haven't been out of here in 3 years. I can't come to do it. You'll have to succumb.
Let me turn, Jonathan, a little bit towards Israel. And one of the things I loved about your essay, that's just the title, "More Unites Us Than Divides Us," that often does not seem to be the case. I mean, if you, I have met secular Israelis who have, shall we say, antipathetic feelings about, say, the Islamic Republic of Iran, but that's nothing like the way they feel about the Haredi community. There's a kind of, in some quarters of Israel, kind of bald fury at what they see as a community that is not pulling its weight in a country under siege. Is that your sense now, after 42 years in Israel, or 45, I think, if it was 1976?
No, I came back to America to practice law.
Okay, so 40. So anyway, more than 40 years in Israel. Is your sense that hostility has grown, subsided, stayed the same? Characterize relations between the Haredi community and the secular world as you've seen them develop in your time in Israel.
Okay, I'm a big Israel booster, you should know. One of my other hats to go on college campuses and to defend, to speak about Israel. It's something that I love doing, so I'm not abashed about that. I think that's part of the story. The antipathy that you described is part of the story, but it's only part of the story. No one has ever gone out, nobody that I'm aware of has ever tried to open up, to advertise classes in Torah, to advertise for secular Israelis and not drawn a crowd. It just doesn't happen. There is an interest, and I think that one of the differences, there's a greater potential in Israel to interest people in the Jewish people than there is in America. In America, it's an identity you can pick or choose and leave, and as the college campuses become more and more hostile to being Jewish and given the susceptibility of teenagers to social pressures, it's going to get harder and harder in America. In Israel, everybody, if you're going into the army and you're going to risk your life over a period of years, at a young age, you have to ask yourself the question, well, why does the collective existence of the Jewish people matter? It can't be that it's just to produce Nobel Prize winners. That can't be the answer to that question. Why does it matter? Why am I being called upon to risk my life for this people? But Israelis do have a strong sense of that. In the 2014 war in Gaza, there were a number of letters that were read from secular Israelis left for their parents to only be open in the event that I don't return. And inevitably they began, don't cry for me. This is one letter that I remember particularly, don't cry for me. Because if I haven't come back, I'm proud to have given my life defending the Jewish people, my homeland, my family. But it was striking to me how many of them began with the Jewish people, that there is, however attenuated, a sense that this country is about the Jewish people. I mean, that's one of the most notable differences between Israelis and Israeli Jews and American Jews. American Jews, this is one of the most depressing aspects, and Wertheimer talks about it, Stephen Cohn talks about it, the declining sense of Jewish peoplehood and responsibility for one another. That's scary. It's also quite frightening. For instance, I mean, the response to the JPCOA, something like that.
JCPOA.
JCPOA, thanks. I was writing about Iran this week. In any event, that over half of American Jews under 35 could describe the destruction of Israel as it would not be a personal tragedy for them, is so contrary to the way that Jews always related to each other through history. You know, they used to say, Jacob Schiff, I think, said, if a Jew gets hit in Russia, then they cry out in America. I mean, this idea of our interrelatedness, that we feel the pain throughout the Jewish people, to no longer feel that is really one of the most telling symptoms. There's hostility in Israel, and there's understandable hostility, I guess.
Can you say another word on the word understandable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the understandable part is that if your children are going to the army and may be killed, and you will spend 3 years dreading every phone call is a potential moment of dread, and someone else's children are not, that hostility is understandable. I mean, what are the explanations? That's a longer subject, which I expect.
Well, let's take that on, because one of the themes in your essay are the mechinot that are active in the IDF, and to some extent
the pre-induction academy, yeah,
the pre-induction academies, and also to some extent with Haredi recruits. But do you see movement within the Haredi community that says we need to rethink our relationship to the Jewish state and our obligations in the Jewish state as we move from a tiny minority within it to an ever larger share of the overall Jewish population?
That's for sure that change is taking place. However it is articulated, but it's taking place. I mean, we are no longer, the original attitude of the community when it started was circle the wagons, we're under assault and they'll do everything possible to destroy us. And there were causes for that as well, but that day has passed. I mean, we're just simply too big. 30% of the entering first graders are in Haredi school frameworks. Many of them, I would say probably, are not coming from Haredi homes, but their parents have somehow decided this is education that they want for their kids. But whatever it is, we're no longer so threatened. Inevitably, more and more Haredim are going out into the general public. I have one son, I have 3 sons. Most of my daughter-in-laws and all my sons have secular degrees. They've been out there. Do I worry about it? Yes. My son, who's unmarried and starting the Hebrew University Law School and business program, I am worried about it. But it's I'm worried about the things that could draw him away from religious observance too. But they're going out there. We are out there. I think the model, the historian Jacob Katz has a model of Jewish communities in Europe. They interacted with the surrounding Gentile community, but their sense of value and identification and value derived from within the internal community. I'd like to see the Haredi community moving more in that direction, but there's, in addition to moving in that direction, they're also moving in the direction of feeling a responsibility for reaching out to secular and traditional Jews. I mean, it's remarkable, these pre-induction academies, they started a program 9 years ago with 3 of them, that's 150 students. They've grown from that to 1,200. And they never had a shortage of volunteers who were willing in the Haredi community, who were willing to be partners, to invite students into their home, to develop a relationship over a period of years. There's never been a shortage, no matter how many mechinot, the pre-induction academies, seek entrance into this program. There's never been a shortage of Haredi volunteers. There are a lot of people who are seeking that contact and who feel that they've benefited from that contact. A lot of the stereotypes are being broken down. Maybe the numbers are relatively small vis-a-vis.
And when you see young Haredi men entering military service and coming back, how do you see them changed? I mean, do you think? What I'm curious about here, I guess, is you're describing a community that, and you're looking at it from the inside, in a community that seems to be changing and evolving and rethinking a number of, I don't want to say assumptions, but a number of relationships. And then I'm going to get into that. And by the way, I should add here that as we reach the midpoint of our conversation, those who are listening in, there's a chat box, there is a question box, and you should start putting in questions. I've known Jonathan for a very long time. As you can see, he's very intellectually agile, in addition to being a very lovely human being. So if you want to ask tough questions,
slippery but lovely.
he went to Yale Law School. He went to Chicago. He's used to cultures of intellectual challenge. So don't hesitate to ask questions that challenge. But getting back to it, you're describing a community that really is rethinking its relationship. And I'm going to get to another side of this question in a moment, but let me ask you first, what do you think that the Haredi community is learning from the less observant or the secular Israeli community? In what way is that changing? you mentioned your son in business school and some apprehensions that you have. Is this a broad phenomenon, or is it just in pieces?
It is, for the women, it's broad. For the men, I mean, each one of my daughter-in-laws, I have a speech therapist, an architect, a 30-year-old daughter-in-law who's the comptroller of a non-religious publicly traded company. What else do we have? My daughter's the head of a computer department at Bank Discount. I mean, they all have, they have some kind of degrees. Among my
And what's your theory about why women are so much better than men?
No, it's that well, first of all, their education is different. Listen, I'm not convinced on that score, though. I do think the unbending of males is a real societal problem. It doesn't work out well for men, and it doesn't work out too well for women either. So that's that's something we could worry about. That's up another discussion. But you have to be different. What do they learn from these encounters? First of all, they get rid of stereotypes. It's never good to go around with too many stereotypes of people on the other side. I mean, one of the poisonous things about modern American society, as I see it, is that people don't meet others, and they claim you have officers of diversity and whatnot, and outnumbering the number of students at Yale, the officers of diversity, but they don't believe in diversity. They don't believe in intellectual exchange. They don't believe in any of the debate that was so central to our college experience, I think. And recently, Yale Law School said, what could we do to get you more involved in our alumni affairs? I told them, stop embarrassing me first, and then we'll talk about the rest.
Did you get a response?
No. When a Jewish student at the University of Chicago was reported in Hadassah magazine saying that she was physically afraid to go back to campus after distance learning wearing a Jewish star, I also thought my alumni contributions there would also decline, and told them so. That also didn't get a response. In any event, where were we? We're talking about Haredi.
Well, we're talking about the way in which exposure to secular life is transforming the Haredi community. And after that, I want to ask you the reverse of that question, which is, and this is part of your essay, the way in which secular Israel is now beginning to encounter the Haredi community in a different kind of way. And you described a few of the programs, which I think are kind of fascinating and worth dilating on. So take those questions in any order you'd like.
First of all, it's always bad to demonize people you view as the other, and it makes you very vulnerable too. When a secular Jew is told that Haredi spend 13 hours a day reciting Psalms, they never work, they don't do anything, they're not striving for anything, they have no goals, and he meets an actual Haredi and there's nothing like that stereotype, then he thinks, well, everything I've ever been told is a lie. I've been filled with nonsense my whole life. Maybe I should check this community out. And it goes both ways, incidentally. When you've been told that all secular young people your age are thinking about is the next hookup or something, and you find out, no, that's not true. That's not true. They're thinking about a lot of things.
We also think about tacos.
What? Brett, you may be beyond me there. But,
go ahead, sorry.
You find out that they're different. I said, in a conversation with Jonathan Haidt not too long ago, I said to him the difference between an Israeli kid, why don't we have this political correctness? Why don't we have this stifling of speech amongst Israeli university students? I said, because they're adults. They've been through life and death situations. When they start university, they are adults. They've done more than most people. They're not still in the stage where Jordan Peterson can say to them, you want to talk about the world economy and socialism versus capitalism, first clean up your room. They've cleaned up their room and done a lot more. Those stereotypes break down, and they can be risky, by the way. You build up the stereotype, you demonize the others, and you simply make them more attractive when everybody will at some point discover that there's something not right about these. My prescription for American Jewry, like my prescription for Israeli Jewry, is expose yourself to Jews for whom being Jewish is their identity. In other words, you can't go up to them and ask, if you were born again, would you prefer to be born not Jewish? Because they have no sense of themselves that's removed from being Jewish. That's so fundamental. That is them. It's not all encompassing. They do other things. They may play a certain sport, a certain instrument. They may, but that is them. That's indistinguishable from their self-identity. Meet those Jews. Understand people who think, meet people for whom being born Jewish really is the greatest privilege. And then find out why anybody could think that way. And I mean, luckily, American society today makes it a lot easier for us all the time, because as it becomes more and more insane, we feel like we're just watching the inmates misbehave. When Bill Maher becomes your favorite comedian, then you know that they, from a Haredi perspective, have gotten pretty
Bill Maher, whose show I know well, is a Jewish boy, at least on one side of his family, and a great supporter of the state of Israel, I might add. I want to ask just one final question before I turn to our audience. Talk to us a little bit about Kesher Yehudi and what it does.
Okay, so Kesher Yehudi started about 12 years ago. And it was basically setting up phone learning relationships from people who were coming in from, who responded to advertisements, and they said they like to learn with somebody over the phone. I mean, the power of these relationships is really extraordinary. The number of them that have gone on from now until then, that have continued all these years. About 9 years ago, somebody named Gilal Olstein was born on a Shomer Hatzir kibbutz. That's a kibbutz where they probably serve pork on Yom Kippur. But sometime after he finished the army, he was sent as a Jewish agency shaliach to Salonika to bolster Jewish identity. He said, well, I don't know anything about being Jewish. How can I bolster Jewish identity? And in the course of that time, he started learning with the local Rav. Didn't become religious, but he came back to Israel a completely changed person. He got a PhD in Jewish studies, his history at Yad Vashem, began to lead 5 to 8 trips to Poland every year. And he always asked them one central question: what makes you different because you're Jewish? How does that make you different? How are you different than anybody else? What is the central quality that you can identify with? And he now says the purpose why he started this, and he approached Mrs. Sila Schneider. She grew up in Mea Shearim. She's one of 11 children. She's a mother of 11. She's probably one of 11 children as well, but I can't say that for sure. And she had started Kesher Yehudi, and he said, can you create a program for me, for my students in these mechinot, these pre-induction academies, which were created after the Rabin assassination, precisely to reinstill some Zionist fervor, knowledge of Jewish history, and knowledge of the community, the various communities of Israel, to train future officers. I mean, an extraordinary high number of people who go to these academies. They take an extra year off between high school and the army, do go on to leadership positions, including as officers in the army. Can you create a program for us in basic Jewish ideas? And the program, the key to this program is ongoing one-on-one learning with the same person over a period of time. It's the development of relations. And she always says, and for this she got an Israel Jerusalem Unity Prize in 2016, she always tells the Haredi volunteers, if you're coming into this because you want to do an act of chesed to share your knowledge with a poor, benighted, secular Jew, this is not the program for you. If you don't think you're going to get, every time two Jews get together, that they should both gain something from one another, that they have the potential to gain, that there's something unique. This person is also, like, in the essay I say, my granddaughter said when I turned 70, your birthday is the day that God decided that he can no longer, he needed you for his world. So that's true of every single Jew in the world. That's true of all of us. And if you can't find that point of connection, sometimes it's hard amidst the fighting and yelling and screaming, but if you can't find that point of connection, you're missing something. It's there. And she insists on that. And it's amazing to see these study partners saying things like, I can't imagine my life without her. And that's as likely to come from the Haredi partner. It's really a very powerful thing. And as you know, when people get older, they start crying more easily. So I have to always watch out when I'm describing this program. But I mean, imagine a boy who was in one of these mechinot, 2014, he gets a 12-hour leave on the Gaza border. He calls his parents, then he tries to call his chavrusa who's in the north and close to Haifa. And he says, I want you to come down and learn with me. And that the married man whom he called, the head of the yeshiva in which he was learning paid for his cab to get down to the Gaza. And when the young man crossed the border, he kissed his mother, he kissed his father, he kissed his sister. And he told them, but I have so little time. The most important thing I can do now is learn Torah with my chavrusa. This impact of feeling that this is what I need now. This is what I need in combat. This is what I need to protect me, strengthen me, give me some sense that I'm connected to the Jewish people. These are not one-time results. But I do think it's that crucial that you not make the criterion of judgment of the success of the program how many people became religiously observant. There are plenty of those, but that should not be the basis of judgment. Did you create a relationship?
Jonathan, I want to turn to some of the people who have been tuning in. Stephen Rosenberg writes, great essay, and I don't disagree, but playing devil's advocate, you have the Haredi community that won't, for the most part, fight in the IDF to defend the only Jewish state in the world, but wants to have a major say over issues like prayer at the wall. They can't have it both ways. It's unreasonable. How do you defend the Haredi who contribute very little to Israeli society financially, yet want to have the largest say? And I don't know Stephen Rosenberg, but I suspect he's speaking for a fair bit of Jewishly minded, pro-Israel minded Jews.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's true that the Haredi community doesn't contribute to Israeli society. I think giving a sense of purpose, giving some fleshing out that the Jewish people for whom that young man who didn't come back in 2014 was defending, by maintaining a sense of that there is a continuity. But the wall is not just a Haredi place, and it's not just Haredim who think that it should remain. It's a symbol of Jewish continuity and unity. In other words, what's being talked about there is really the continuation of practices, except for the times when we had no access to the Kotel at all, which had been normative there for 1,500 years. You're not talking about a Haredi position. This is not an issue, incidentally, that excites too many Jews in Israel. A lot of people come to the Kotel. Army induction ceremonies are held at the Kotel. Nobody says, I'm not going to go there because women don't daven on there's not an egalitarian space there. Now, I personally, on the list of issues in the world, whether there should be a place at Robinson's Arch, could be as expanded. I mean, I think $85 million will be, 85 million shekels is a lot of money to spend for a place which will remain largely unused. But should it be there, I think the people who would suffer most from it would be the reform movements, because it's going to remain empty and it's going to remain an embarrassment. But be that as it may, it's not true that we don't contribute. We contribute something very fundamental, which is a sense of what it is that has allowed us to get to this point where the state of Israel could be created, where the state of Israel could flourish as it has. And the religious community, including the national religious community, was different than the Haredi community, but certainly the most fervent participants in the army. It's a religious commandment as far as they're concerned. it does contribute to the state. The amount of people, in terms of Aliyah, in terms of the times that is spent in Israel, in terms of the investment in businesses here, the Haredi community is a major economic factor too. I mean, we don't have any tourism now, but when tourism comes back, you'll see these things are all, and largely, this is the community which is most likely to travel, whose children are certain to learn in Israel after high school, and many of them will end up living here. So to say that it doesn't contribute economically is not true.
So let me ask you on that, on something you just mentioned. Jeanette Reinhard asks, I'm curious about Jonathan's views on the Haredi position on secular math, science, etc., education, and how it fits into his view of more united.
You know, I personally would like to see, I'm not opposed, certainly as a theological issue, I'm not opposed to any of those studies and provided them for my children. I also saw that, you know, my youngest son had to do a preparatory year before going into the Hebrew University. And, you know, I got a 786 on my SAT math, but he far surpassed any math I had ever done in high school by the time he, after 1 year. So a lot of this can be caught up, though I think it's a mistake to say that that's how you should do it. I don't think that's how you should do it. You know, I think Brett, you should know I spend most of my time as a critic, an internal critic. I always used to say, Baruch Hashem, I can write for the Jerusalem Post and its distinguished editor by presenting the best of the Haredi world to the outside world. And that I have at the same time the ability to write and address directly my own community through the pages of Mishpacha or whatever other Haredi publications I'm writing for. That was very important to me, to have both access to both. You know, my criticism, I think that we did take what was an elite educational model, which was one or two young men from every town in Europe would be sent to yeshivas. The rest were mostly working by the time they were 13. The advanced, and the ones who went to yeshivas at 13 were suited to learn 10 to 12 hours a day in Gemara learning, which is very hard. I'm exhausted after an hour, I can tell you that. And I've had some serious studies in my life, but nothing as exhausting as Talmudic learning. They were suited for that. Now we've taken an elite model and imposed it on an entire society, and it doesn't work because too many young men can't sustain that. They need more breaks during the day. They need a variety of subjects. Math and science would all be good. The girls generally get them, probably not at the highest level, but there are schools. One of my daughter's school, I think, was tops in the country in a lot of national exams when she was in school. But I'm saying it's not a theological issue. In my opinion, it is not a theological issue. There are enough models in Jewish history of religious Jews who have been exposed to secular studies. When the secular studies become a means of imposing on us, then that's a different story. But I think it's a big mistake to think that in America, it's less and less the case, except maybe in Lakewood, New Jersey, where there's no secular studies for high school students. One of the hardest things, I wrote about this recently, if we want large-scale Haredi Aliyah from America, Aliyah from the Yeshiva community in America, we're going to have to adjust or at least accept different models for Haredi education in Israel, because they're simply not used to a model of boys at the age of 11, 12 stopping all secular learning until they may decide that it's necessary for a livelihood to go out and subsequently to get some education.
Jonathan, I want to respect time constraints, and we're running to the end, so we're going to have a bit of a lightning round. So just very brief answers. Because Hannah Rothstein asks please 3 times, I'm going to ask you, how typical is your family? She writes, most Haredim do not have secular educations and work actively to prevent their kids from getting one. And then says there are data on this that you're ignoring. Do you have a brief answer to Hannah?
Okay, we're not exactly typical. My wife and I are both Baal Teshuvas. My wife and I are both junior Phi Beta Kappas. We both have a secular education. We both work, and we come from a different background. And my kids happen to be mostly exceptionally bright. But the ones they're, Bli Ayin Hara, it's like, what is Carson Kyler, where does he grow? We're like that. But we're not so unique. We're not unique in the community in which we live. We're not, and the trends are like this. To say that we're typical, there's many subgroups within the Haredi community. There's the traditional Yerushalmi community. There's the Sephardi community, which does push secular education more intensely. There's a Hasidic community, and there's so many sub-communities to make a generalization about the community. But the trend lines are that the Rosenblums will not be the only ones with some secular education or who later get it. Because the boys in yeshiva who want to go in for long-time learning, they also want a wife who can make a decent living. That almost inevitably involves some secular education.
Yeah, a couple quick more questions. Paul Meyer says that you mentioned a book that sounded like the Book of Fire. What was the book that you mentioned at the beginning?
There's a book as you go from the first floor. I haven't been in the Diaspora Museum in many, many years, but as you go from the first floor in the days in 1976, as you went from the first floor to the top floor, there was a large volume which you could go through illuminated paintings, pictures of different destruction, starting with the York Massacre and I guess moving to the Holocaust. It's just that's what I think it was called the Book of Fire, but this goes back a long, long way.
And then there's a question for me from Shlomo Gervitz. How do I access your column without having to subscribe to the left's flagship newspaper of record?
Oh, that's a good one.
My answer is, do you want to help me eat or not, Shlomo? So subscribe.
It's not really true, Brett. Your columns are so good that they get sent around by the ones who fall on their sword and
you're helping him. You're helping him not feed me.
I want to help him.
Help contribute to my children's college tuitions. We've hit the 1 o'clock hour, Jonathan, and I suspect that a lot of people here could last another hour in a fruitful dialogue, debate. I've known you for almost 20 years, since I became almost exactly 20 years ago editor of the Jerusalem Post. I've known you as a beautiful, beautiful prose writer and polemicist and thinker, and someone who has spent his life in a process of engagement. And that's one of the reasons why I was so eager to have you contribute. And I hope that those on this call, even those who aren't on board with everything you have to say, see that spirit of robust engagement in the way that you think and the way you write, and the kind of joy you bring to every discussion. So I just wanted to thank you for doing this talk. Thank you for contributing. The essay is More Unites Than Divides Us in the 3rd issue of Sapir, our continuity issue. We're hard at work on our 4th, which should be coming out early next year. And there will be a lot more of this. And I want to particularly thank the audience for being so engaged and I think attentive. I hope it's been a good way to spend your lunch. Jonathan, have a lovely evening in Jerusalem, and hopefully, COVID allowing, I'll see you before too long. And stay well.
And I just put in a plug, Brett, for since you want to support your children, I want to support mine. If anybody wants to, find out more of my views, and about 2,500 pieces are collected at www.jewishmediaresources.com, and you can subscribe there, and it's free. It's not like Substack. You'll do much better than Substack.
Or even the New York Times.
Right.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. A wonderful conversation, and I look forward, hopefully, to seeing you in person before too long.
Thanks,
Have a
Brett.
great evening.
Bye-bye, Brett. Thank you.